Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Getting More Out of Capoferro. I promised that we'd be returning to the series, and we should hopefully be able to now record this series relatively regularly, so it should be coming out, if not every week, every other week, now that Jacob here is on the mend. So, when we last left off, we had finished off with plate 8, which kind of takes a little bit of a side to talk about defense of the leg. Beforehand, we've been on plate 7, well 6 and 7 technically, which gives us the idea of dealing with the outside line, i.e. thrust in Secunda, and then counter thrust in Secunda, which is kind of the foundation that Capoferro is going to build off of as we go. This links back to that conversation, and now we just start talking about the idea of adding slightly wider lines. So, as a quick reminder of what I'm talking about, let's not be buzzed over, just kind of. The basic idea is that if I find the sword in quarta, his most natural action is going to be cavazione, and then immediately wound in Secunda with a lunge. I can parry this, we've seen that before, but what would be much better would be for me to go ahead and go back at him into Secunda with either in place, depending on the depth of his lunge, or doing a lunge of my own. Either way, that's the solution, right? He's going to go around, you go in. This is really fencing 101. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about options that can strengthen and widen that, and then the cost therein. So basically, what's going to happen here is now, rather than using my own, just my lead foot and keeping where I am, if I want to add more pressure, I can instead use my back foot. Now, the key thing here is that I am not going to be doing a wide pass. So what I mean by that is I'll go ahead and put my sword down, and this will be our illustration. This would be the line between me and Jacob. With my passing step, I'm not looking to step away from the line, and I'm also not looking to just step forward on the line. What I want to have happen is, from where my stance is, if this were going to be a lunge, my passing step should be almost like I'm lunging with the other foot. So now I am decidedly more left foot forward and strong. The reason that I want this is because I find a lot of people have difficulty pushing themselves forward and have the tendency to instead want to step out. This is its own thing, but in this case it's going to make you weaker. What we want to ensure is that when we make this Secunda shape, my shoulder is nice and strong and supported as I come forward, and everything is here and ready to go. My hand is here out of habit with the dagger. We'll be putting it forward to secure their arm. So, with that in mind, let's also talk about the caveat of passing forward with modern context. Historically, the sword would go through his head, and I can then go on with my merry day. Modern day, even with my maximum flex, it's not going to happen. So, what you will see when I strike Jacob is that after I get that certain flex, I'll let my arm start to retract. Just like I talked about in my video last week, let the arm retract along the elbow, not the wrist. This not only keeps you safer, it also is a lot nicer for him, and I'm not going to break my wrist. So, the action itself. I find the sword. He cavazione and looks to attack in Secunda. As he's coming in, I'm going to throw my body forward so that I am not only doing the same counter thrust I was doing before, but I'm also going to be able to put my hand out and secure his wrist. Now, if you do this with a sharp where I can go through target, or you get a deeper flex, or you have a shorter blade, then you may actually find yourself here and your arm is still straight. With the length of blade, I use a 42. Jacob, I think you use a 46? 45. 45, okay. We are not going to have that happen. As such, at most, I usually have my hand ahead of my guard, but I'm not worried about grabbing him. This is partially a personal preference thing. I don't like to grab onto cups. Reason being is that if I now move this around, I am directly manipulating his fingers, and that is just too much of a risk in my book. So I keep my hand open, just as though I was doing a dagger parry or a hand parry, and if need be, I can then come forward and take care of it, or alternatively, if he brings it forward again, I can deal with it. So it works out either way, but I'm not going to necessarily fixate on getting that wrist grab, because it is a product of the sword not being able to go through the person, not a downfall of my technique. So, here's that again. We're out in Texas to the inside. I find the sword, he comes around, just straight in, nice strong passing step, and here this is usually the kind of flex you're going to get. And this time I did actually manage to get his wrist. I only let my arm withdraw as necessary, and I keep him locked out as I strike him in the breast. And that's all from that nice strong passing step. Otherwise, for your hand, it should feel exactly the same as though you were doing a normal Secunda counter hit. Now, what this introduces, and what the following play within the plate is going to exemplify, is we have now added a tiny bit of wideness. Now what I mean here is, can I actually borrow your sword, Jake? Thank you. Basically, normally, I'm going to go ahead and set this on the floor for illustration. Normally, our swords are on this line. In fact, I'm actually going to spin that around. Normally, Jacob and I are doing this, right? So both of us are in quarta right now, meaning his tip is lined up with my interior, my tip is lined up with his interior, etc., right? When we do our secunda, usually that is only about here, so I'm still relatively linear. When I bring my left side forward, even if I stay here, now we see that my arm has drifted to the outside of that original line. It's still in the center line game because I'm creating a wedge, but I have now made a gap here because I went to the width of my own shoulders rather than being in the center, which is only affordable by staying right foot forward. As such, the counter against someone introducing this sort of movement is to come back to middle. And the way we're going to come back to middle is we're going to introduce the inquartata. So, should you go ahead and switch that to Jacob? Now, it should be noted that inquartata can be a bit, inquartata and girata can be a little bit fuzzy depending upon which source as to what you're doing. In this case, it's going to be a void with the back foot is preferred. However, you can also achieve this with a void of the front foot. Capoferro does both, as do several other sources, and there's usually the biggest difference is how far you want to go and also what you're looking to achieve. So in this case, I find you can, again, you can do it with both, and I'll show it with both, but we're going to focus on the rear foot for right now. So, the idea here is it's relatively the same setup. Jacob finds my blade, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to feint now by cavazione, but I'm not going to commit my body. So the idea here is to get him to proc. I don't just want to do this. That doesn't get him excited at all. What I want to do is I want to add a little bit of emphasis. The way I like to do that is either I will slightly bring my head down, lining up with my guard. That gives him the indicator that I'm about to start to move into secunda, because this is the advice Capoferro gives us. Or alternatively, I can also go ahead and bring my shoulder a little inward, or my shoulder a little square, which makes it look almost like I'm going back to his sword. This will make your hand turn a little bit more, but can get him more interested. Basically, do whatever gets him to react and be ready to do multiple different things to really get him to bite on it. I like to tilt my head personally. But his target is going to stay the same regardless. He's going right for my breastbone, which means that when I feint this, he's looking to step up and forward, reinforcing against that imaginary shot until it goes in. So all I need to do to be safe is just void this to here, and with his arm remaining straight, I'm safe. I'm not actually dodging all that much. I'm really just getting around about the width of his guard. Yes, he can track, and that is something we'll talk about in a second, but for right now, it's really not that big of a deal. And the reason it's not that big of a deal is because he's being a good fencer and focusing on resisting the shot that never fired. And that's how you want them to be reacting. If they're not, they're just kind of tokenly putting this out there, don't attempt this. So, one more time slow, and then we'll go through it a little more fluidly. He finds my sword, I feint, he's trying to reinforce that, and I will be out of the way of this when it arrives. Now for my motion, I am performing a cavazione, and I'm just going to go ahead and wound him in the stomach. You can also bring this up to the breast. It's all open pretty much, and you could even hit him in the face. Don't do that, that's really mean, right? I like to wound in the stomach personally, just because it allows my sword to flex a little bit more, but the breast is absolutely available. For my feet, what I'm focusing on here is there's no reason to worry about being carried forward. So when you later see the inquartata, as we will get to, we're going to see that the foot is brought more parallel with your lead foot to get you a lot more turn and also gain you a little bit of distance. In this case, because he's coming toward us, this is like lunging with the normal counter thrust. I'd be better off just kind of moving pure to the side, basically reversing my stance. He'll shoot by me, and I don't need to worry about anything else other than straightening my arm. So, let's take a look at that. He finds my sword, I feint, and I'm safe and out of the way, having struck him in the middle of the chest. Now, it's also important to make sure that when you do this, you're not just moving your foot, you're moving your whole shoulder. Basically, keep the exact same posture you have, step back, and you should find naturally that you turn, cast the arm out to the side for balance, and everything's going to work out pretty well. So we'll do that just one more time, and then I'll talk about doing it with the lead foot. So, he finds my sword, feint, there's my strike. Now, with the lead foot, you can also achieve this. This is also particularly good if people haven't ever seen you void with the lead foot, and can be very useful as we'll start to see later. The idea here is that I'm basically just picking up my lead foot and stepping over. what I pretty much end up in is it's almost like I'm standing in my more dramatic version of a longsword stance. I let myself square up to where my torso is facing now, so that way I void my body out of the way as we did before. So again, just kind of up, over, boom. This one takes a little bit more practice, but can be a bit more subtle, especially if you have to do this off of a quasi-lunge. Moving the back foot can kind of be difficult because you got to step up. This you can literally just drop into a hole. At least I find that easier, you may not. But here's the exact same play, now with the idea of me using the lead foot. So he finds the sword, I feint, exact same idea. I'm a little bit closer to him, but again, it's not the end of the world because he's going where I was. Now, let's talk about tracking. Sometimes you will encounter people who, when they counter thrust, they are less worried about creating a good wedge, and they're more worried about just binding on my sword. So what do I mean by this? Go ahead and hold your sword up there. Basically, some people who aren't confident with their counter thrust, rather than going, I'm going to get middle, where it's almost like I'm going against his sword and then back to middle. They will instead forego that part of the tip and just do this. This creates a wider wedge and also gives you the ability to step up and grab. So essentially they're doing more of a parry grapple thrust as opposed to a true counter thrust that happens to grab. Against this, doing the incortata, you may find that they are able to track you with that secondary action. I recommend that if you can identify this in a fencer that you're going against, don't try the void because there's no point to. Instead, let's look at that scenario. He finds my sword. I Cavazione and give him the feint, but he's more looking to just widen this up. Just Cavazione and lunge back in with quarta thrust. Even if he's passing, you'll still be able to achieve this. This would even be an opportunity to possibly move below the sword. But otherwise, if he's still being a good fencer, but just like twitches his wrist over, I just want to show you for sake of proportion where this actually gets us, right? So he finds the sword, I feint, he comes in with that passing step, okay? And now he, as part of it, goes ahead and lets this touch me. This really isn't getting a whole lot. I mean, sure, he might be able to get a little bit of purchase on my left breast, but I'm not really all that worried about it. And furthermore, if I am, with this sword where it should be, flex, of course, being its thing, this is not going to hurt me significantly. So, all that is to say, what does this plate teach you? Once you start adding in that wideness, and we're not talking huge, we're talking just, whereas before we were in the center of our bodies, now both of our swords are going to one extreme or the other by either squaring up or narrowing the torso. That starts to implement some new lines, and this is really going to come back into itself when we start doing rapier and dagger, wherein now not only does passing in and out become a lot more common, but also the idea of wanting to go back in between the weapons once one is committed to a side is going to be a lot more common. But otherwise, thank you very much, Jacob. And thank you all very much for watching. We will be going over some other techniques another time.